Hello, everybody, and welcome to your 2023 Year Ahead Horoscope for Cancer Risings. Now, you can watch this if you're a Cancer sun, but it might make a little bit more sense if you watch it from the perspective of your rising sign. In this video, I'm going to be going over quickly at first just the major transits of this year and what months to pay attention to. Then I'm going to go into advice for Cancer Risings, things to keep in mind, things to stay focused on. And then after that, I'm going to be going month by month into what the major highlights are for each month of the year. So make sure you like this video so you can follow up on it throughout the year and see if the predictions come true. As well, leave me a comment below. Let me know what month you're looking forward to the most. Let me know what you're not looking forward to. Let me know if you have plans that are in alignment with what the astrology has going for you. So let's get started. Whoops, wrong button. I want this. Okay, so this is also a two-part video series. I did a whole video that just really goes into the transits of 2023, and I break them down more into detail. Make sure you watch that video because then this video will make a lot more sense because this is just going to be focused on how it's applying to you specifically. But the major events that we have going on is one, Saturn's going into Pisces. Oh, I already have this already up here, so let me backtrack. Anyway, Saturn's going into Pisces on March 7th, and followed up by that, Pluto's going to be going into Aquarius. These are two relatively big changes that we have going on this year, and this all happens in March. March is the biggest month of this year. Later on, we'll have Jupiter go into Taurus, which is really great. The North Node is going to be going into Aries, and the South Node is going to be going into Libra, which will be really important for you guys. So the eclipses over this next year and a half, 2 years will be really important. And then really the last highlight that we have of this year is during the summer, we're going to have a Venus retrograde in Leo. I really like this Venus retrograde. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, so don't really worry about it that much, but we'll talk about it. So advice that I have for the Cancer Risings, take responsibility in work and career. There's a lot going on in this area for you guys that's especially going to be important when we get to about 2025, 2026. So as the year goes out, you're going to be feeling more and more of a pull and an urge to, have more ambition and do more in your work. So think about that. Also, this is going to be a big year between balancing friends and networks and alone time. I think you guys might get kind of caught up in everyone's stuff. And so having that balance, I think, will be really important. And there's a big change in friends and relationships and people that are close to you going on throughout this year, especially related to money. But we'll be talking about that as we go on. So the first thing that we have going on in January, I did one take of this, and for whatever reason, the notes are still drawn on or whatever. So ignore that. But the first big thing that we have going on in January is Mars is stationing direct. Now, Mars has been in your 12th house for months now. And if you're a Cancer rising, you've been one of my clients, I've said, over these next few months, you're going to be losing your mind. The 12th house rules isolation, self-sabotage, repressed thoughts and feelings and hidden enemies. And so Mars rules fights and conflicts, and it's been going back and forth in your 12th house. By the time we get to January 12th, it feels like you're going to have a little bit more of a grip on that. Maybe you've been doing a lot of purging. You've had a lot of voices in the back of your head. This is when, again, things you get a little bit more of a grip on things. Also, when we get to about January 18th, that is when Mercury is going to be stationing direct. Now, before the new year, Mercury is going to station retrograde in Capricorn, in your 7th house of relationships and others. And so when Mercury stations direct, or when Mercury stations retrograde, there'll be some type of miscommunication or a delay within a relationship. And once it stations direct here on the 18th, things will actually begin to move forward. And so what I've been saying for people is, if you are expecting January 1st to be like new year, new me, rah, rah, I think you're not really going to get that energy going until around the end of January. I think that's when it's going to feel much more excited to move forward with things, because at that point, we actually have planets moving forward. The only thing I didn't bring up in that regard is Jupiter. So as the year ends, 2022, Jupiter is going to ingress back into Aries. Now, Jupiter was in Aries from May, June, July, August, September, October. And it was just kind of this little introduction. Jupiter rules expansion and hope and gifts. It rules your 9th house of spirituality and publishing, and it rules your 6th house of work. And Jupiter went into your 10th house, where there was this expansion with work, this expansion with career, especially Jupiter in Aries, like doing things yourself. As Jupiter went retrograde, there was kind of the slowdown, and then Jupiter went back into Pisces. And once we get to the beginning of the year, Jupiter's going to go back into your 10th house, expanding your career, expanding your legacy, expanding how people know you and recognize you. So I think this is really positive. But it's going to take a minute for that energy to really get going until Mars stations direct, which isn't going to be again till January 12th, as you can see here. Mars has been in your 12th house for so long. I think by the time it stations direct, you guys will feel a lot better. You know, Mars rules your 5th house of vices, love, romance, sex, pleasure, and it's been in the 12th house of hidden enemies. It also rules your 10th house of career and reputation, and it's also been in the 12th house of hidden enemies and self-sabotage. So you guys have been kind of losing your minds a little bit. Once Mars stations direct, I feel like there'll be this really awesome push forward. You won't be out of it necessarily, but you will have much more ambition and confidence about getting out of your situation. And then Mercury stations direct. Again, all of the relationship stuff clears up. And then it's really by the time we get to the end of January, things are really starting to move forward. So let's talk about February. The only thing that we've got going on in February is Mercury leaves shadow. Again, Mercury's been retrograding in your 7th house of relationships. And once it leaves shadow, it's like everything that you had to do 2-3 times is finally done. There was something that you were dealing with relationships that finally gets to move forward by the time we get to the 7th. So that's really it about February. There's not a lot going on in February. It's really the calm before the storm. But it's really the relationship thing that gets moved on for you guys. But let's talk about March. March is the biggest month of this year. Number one, we're going to have Venus conjoin Jupiter in Aries. This is happening on March 2nd. This is technically a good transit. I think there are things wrong with it that aren't going to necessarily make it perfect. And it is going to kind of sting, but it's a really good transit. This is happening in your 10th house of career, your legacy, your reputation. Let me go ahead and pull up the chart. So the big thing here is Jupiter has been making its way through your 10th house now for a little bit. And Jupiter's been expanding your work, your career, your reputation. And then when you get Venus in the mix, Venus is going to conjoin Jupiter, and they're both going to conjoin Chiron. So Venus is all about fun and pleasure and romance, but Venus is in detriment in Aries. So there's this kind of like, you know, give me energy, kind of like, you know, taking what isn't yours kind of energy. And so it's Venus and Jupiter, right? The two good planets conjoining each other in the 10th house. This is good for work and career, but it's on Chiron. There's something painfully healing about it, right? I always like to refer to Chiron as like alcohol in an open wound. It's going to clean it up, but it's going to sting a little bit. And Venus is in detriment here. There's this sense of, you know, in order to get what you want, you feel like you have to fight for it, or you feel like you have to take it. And Jupiter is here, so there's this opportune time to do that. And so this might be a position where you kind of have to like just be like, you know what? No, I'm going to do this. You know what? No, I'm going to fucking go for it. So this looks really good. It just might be a little counterintuitive for you to do, if that makes sense. But this looks really good for career, expanding networks, expanding friends, all of that stuff. But then as we move on, about 5 days later, we get Saturn entering Pisces. And again, this is like one of the biggest transits this year. Saturn has been in Aquarius for the past 2.5 years. It's been in your 8th house of death, shared resources, other people's money. There's been this outcasted, alienated feeling you've had from, you know, access to other people's resources, or, you know, Saturn also rules your 7th house of relationships. So maybe you felt stuck in the, you know, having to use other people's resources to get by. That's finally all over. But Saturn, which rules, you know, maturity, discipline, time, commitment, rules, regulations, it's going into your 9th house of spirituality, religion, far distance travel, higher education, publishing, social media. So this is where Saturn's asking you to get really serious about these topics. These next few years are going to have you, I don't want to say questioning your beliefs, but really trying to get down to the truth of, what do you believe? Where the 9th house rules travel, and Saturn being here might be like problems or restrictions with travel. This might be a much bigger commitment when it comes to higher education or your astrology or your spirituality. But Saturn is giving you this area, or is taking this area of your life and asking you to be more serious about it, be more disciplined about it. You know, take your time with it. And this is what is going to be going on for the next 2.5 years. Pretty much until about 2025, Saturn will be in your 9th house. And by the time we get to 2025, you're going to go through a whole, you know, I don't want to say a renaissance, but your beliefs and your worldviews are really going to change. They're going to mature in a lot of ways. So some of you may not be excited about that, but I think it is actually something to be excited about. So the other thing that we have going on is on March 22nd, Pluto enters Aquarius. So this is much more of a bigger deal on the world stage and in geopolitics, but you will feel it. Pluto's been in your 7th house of relationships for the past 12 years. Pluto rules transformation, power, fear, corruption. And as it's been in your 7th house of relationships, I'm assuming you've had quite a powerful revelation in relationships over the past 12 years. But that energy is now going into your 8th house. So now it's really talking about power, fear, corruption around other people's money, death, debt, taxes, occult, secrets. The 8th house is a really weird place. And mind you, this is a 20-year-long transit. So you're not just going to see the immediate effects of it, super immediately into your life. I think you will see a big change on the world stage happen. I think it's going to be very clear. But when Pluto goes into your 8th house, you might have a lot of fear over dealing with other people's money or occult or secret things. And Pluto is asking you to take that fear and use it as power and not necessarily succumb to the fear, if that makes sense. But again, that's a 20-year-long transit. So you have a lot of time to really chew and digest that. That's going to be a really big shift. But then we get to March 25th, and this is when Mars enters Cancer. This one's going to be I would say it's going to be brutal, but it might be good for you guys simply because Mars is finally going to leave your 12th house, and I think anything is better than, I would rather take a shitty first house transit than a long-term shitty 12th house transit any day. And Cancer rules your first house, so it talks about the self, your body, your image, your personality. And so the big thing here is Mars has just spent 8 months in your 12th house of paranoia, fear, isolation. And when Mars goes into your first, Mars rules fights and conflicts and separating and cutting. So when it goes into your first house, you might be a little bit more aggravated, you might be a little bit more upset, might be a little bit more crabby than normal. And Mars is in fall in Cancer, which means it doesn't do that well there. You have to think Mars rules like fights and conflicts, and Cancer is like nurturing and protecting, right? So there's going to be this sense where you become very self-defensive, and not necessarily that that's a bad thing, but I think there might be this really big focus on self-care. I don't necessarily know what that looks like for you guys. Everyone has a different life, right? But Mars does rule your 10th house of your career and your reputation, and it's in your first house and fall in the first. So I think this is going to be an easy time to, back yourself up into a corner if you are too defensive. But Mars also rules your 5th house of love, romance, sex, children, art, music, creativity, and it will be in your first house of yourself. So there is going to be this moment where you feel much more expressive than normal. And Mars is going to trine Saturn. There's something spiritual about this. There's something very like, I feel like you're going to be pivoting into a direction of like a little bit more of self-care, but it's going to be hard, if that makes sense. So as we move forward into April, we have a few things going on. Now, again, March is really the biggest month, but things really ramp up. Quarter 2 and quarter 3 are the biggest quarters of this year. And the first thing that we have is Jupiter Cazimi in Aries. So again, Jupiter has already dipped into Aries in 2022, and that gave us a little bit of a taste of what to expect. But this is really the reset point with Jupiter. A Cazimi is when a planet conjoins the sun, or the sun conjoins a planet, and it really resets that planet's story or energy. But this is in your 10th house of career, legacy, reputation. Again, this is on the 11th. And again, Jupiter is about expanding, bringing truth. Jupiter is about gifts, abundance, doing things larger than life. And so this is and the sun also rules your 2nd house of money and finances. So this seems like a really big reset when it comes to your work and your career, a really big opportunity, if anything, especially regarding money and things like that. So this is something really to look forward to. And what's interesting about this is just after that Jupiter Cazimi, we have a solar eclipse in Aries. Now, this is happening on the 19th. Now, the biggest thing with this is at this point, the North Node and the South Node are still in Taurus and Scorpio. But this is the first eclipse that we have in Aries that will be kind of opening up the door or opening up the portal for the next year and a half's eclipses. And again, this is in your 10th house, career, legacy, reputation. And why this is important is because eclipses are like emergency events. They really take your attention. They're big gateways into new things. And the North Node is like, or at least when you have an eclipse on the North Node, there's just this extreme pull and urge and desire and hunger to go in a specific direction. And this is an eclipse in your 10th house. So there's going to be starting this like huge urge and pull to do more with your career, to do more with your life, essentially, especially regarding reputation, legacy. This can deal with relationships in one regard, but this eclipse is really like a reset point with your career, and it's a very big, explosive day. So I would expect a lot of forward movement with work stuff. And what's interesting is immediately after that, on the 21st, we have Mercury going retrograde in Taurus. This is interesting because, for one, this is in your 11th house of community, networks, friends, sometimes your career, depending on your chart. But Mercury, so Mercury goes retrograde, right? Mercury's going to go retrograde in your 11th house, where there's going to be this miscommunication with friends, this delay with friendships. Mercury does rule your 12th house of hidden enemies, so maybe a friend becomes an enemy or an enemy becomes a friend. But Mercury's going to be retrograding in this first part of Taurus. And here soon, which we're going to be talking about, Jupiter's going to enter Taurus. And so this Mercury retrograde is kind of like getting your house prepared for guests. It's kind of like, again, getting everything organized for this Jupiter ingress. So this is going to symbolize a really big change in your friends, your networks, your community, and the people that you relate to. But it's a Mercury retrograde. It's a rethinking of things. It's also on top of Uranus. It's going to be a little bit random. It's going to be a little bit unexpected. It's going to destabilize things a lot. And that leads us to May, because as we get into May, we have, again, this Mercury retrograde happens right after an eclipse. And so we're in the middle of what we call eclipse season. And then we end eclipse season with the last lunar eclipse in Scorpio here on Cinco de Mayo. This one, I want to say, is important. It's important because it's the last one, but in reality, it's the least intense eclipse that we've had. So as the eclipses have happened in Taurus and Scorpio, we had some really gnarly ones in April and May of 2022. Then we had some even more gnarly ones in October, November of 2022. This is the last one. And the analogy I've been using is like, if you're moving a house, there's the day where you move all of the big furniture, and there's the day that you do the last kind of cleanup. That's really what this eclipse is. And it's an eclipse activating your 11th house of friends, networks, society, but it's an eclipse in your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, creativity. And so, as you can see here, I did that incorrectly. This is actually happening in your 5th house. I know, just ignore this. I'm sorry, I got this wrong. It's your 5th house, love, romance, sex, creativity. And so there's been a lot of purging in this area for you. There's been a lot of like regressive things that have been going on. And this is kind of like your last cleanup session. So whatever you haven't gotten rid of, it's time to get rid of it at this point. So then we get to May 16th, and that's when Jupiter actually enters Taurus. This is, again, your 11th house. So community, networks, friends. And Jupiter expands, right? Jupiter gives gifts. Jupiter brings abundance, and it's going into your 11th house of friends. So expect to be hanging out a lot more with friends, especially too because Jupiter rules your 6th house of work and coworkers, employees, pets, health. It also rules your 9th house of spirituality, religion, far distance travel, foreign people, foreign countries, higher education. So maybe this is making friends in a higher education field. Maybe this is, hanging out more with people that align with your beliefs. But this is really good. This is a really good transit. I really like this. But again, it's really just focusing on friends, networks, communities. Mercury is freshly direct here too. So it's like you have this whole revamp of your friendships and the people that you associate with. And then we get to May 20th. May 20th is when Mars enters Leo. And the only reason this is important is because we're going to later have a Venus retrograde in Leo, and that Mars ingress is really going to kick things off. This is going into your 2nd house of money, finances, possessions, and food. So let's pull this up. This is happening on the 20th, just a few days later. And Mars rules fights, conflicts, separating, cutting. And Mars in Leo is very like doing things for the glory, doing things that are courageous, doing things to be triumphant. And this is in your 2nd house, again, of money, finances, and resources. And so Mars burns things, so it's going to be really easy to burn cash through this time, which is interesting because Mars will go opposite Pluto in your 8th house. So there's some money dynamic that gets brought into play, some power dynamic related to money, especially related to your money versus other people's money that you might be dependent on, or that, maybe they're dependent on you. But it also squares Jupiter. So there's something about your 10th ruler squaring Jupiter here where it's like something about this work and this money stuff is going to have some, like maybe you make more money and so you start spending more money. That's kind of maybe what this looks like. So we get into June. In June, the first thing that we have going on the 1st is Jupiter conjoining Rahu in Taurus, better known as the North Node. Again, this is in your 11th house of community, networks, friends. And the big thing here is the North Node is still in Taurus at this point. And we're getting ready for the North Node to move signs, but at this point, it's closing out. And what the North Node represents is like this hunger, this desire, this drive, right? And it's been in Taurus for security, stability, better quality things within your 11th house of friends and communities and networks. And so Jupiter conjoining Uranus is like an overconsumption of things. I think the thing to be worried about would be like, again, maybe you might meet a bunch of people and it's all great, but like, it's going to be really easy to hang out with people all the time. And it makes me question, do you need to be hanging out with people all the time? How social are you being? Mercury also leaves shadow at this point. So this just seems like a big like influx of friendships and socializing at this point, which could be really, really good. But when you have Jupiter, the planet of excess, and the North Node, the thing of like over consuming, it's going to be really easy to spend too much time with people. And this is why I said earlier, maybe, taming your time and balance between yourself and your alone time and your friends is going to be important. So that happens on the 1st. And then after that, we have our Saturn retrograde. This is the first retrograde in Pisces that we'll have. This happens on the 16th. Again, this is in your 9th house of spirituality and religion and higher education and all that fun stuff. And the big thing with this is as Saturn goes forward, I might sound like a broken record here because I have to repeat myself a lot. But as Saturn moves forward, there is like this energy of gaining more responsibility, taking on more authority, taking on more control, or being given more obligations, being given more, things that you have to be disciplined on. And this is in your 9th house, spirituality, astrology, social media, all of that stuff. And as Saturn goes retrograde, this is where what might have felt very fun at first, like excited to get this power and authority and this maturity, when Saturn goes retrograde, all of that comes into question. It's the analogy I've been using. It's like when you get a management position, that management position feels really good until you have to deal with manager problems. And this is when the problems come up. And this is the learning time. This is kind of like, overcoming your, shitty self-dialogue, saying that I can't, or, things like that. And Saturn being retrograde is the time to just do the work and maintain discipline so you can get to go where you want to be. So this is where your beliefs are really going to shift, especially around relationships. Maybe you start dating someone foreign. Maybe you start dating someone in a long-distance relationship. But that takes a really big turn, especially access to other people's resources related to school or traveling. That really takes a big turn here on the 16th. Then after that, we have Venus entering shadow. This is in Leo, of course, and this is on the 19th. And this is important. This is, again, in your 2nd house of money and finances. And why this is important is because at this point, Venus is already in Leo. So there's already this bigger focus on your money and your finances, right? Mars and Venus are in there. But when Venus enters shadow, what that means is whatever happens on this day, on June 19th, you're going to come back to here in a few months, because this is where Venus will station direct. Now, this is evening star Venus. Evening star Venus is very receptive. Things just come naturally to evening star Venus. And this is Venus in Leo. Lots of attention, lots of attention essentially. But when Venus enters shadow, well, Venus is going to retrograde. So there's a value shift that's going to occur here. And this is in your 2nd house of money. So you're going to have a big shift around money and finances here really soon. Venus in Leo might be receiving a lot of attention or a lot of the glory, but there's going to be something about it you don't like. When Venus goes retrograde, you will undergo this transition phase. And then when Venus stations direct, you'll have a much better understanding of what you value in relation to your money. But that all starts when Venus enters shadow here on the 19th. And this is like maybe receiving some money. Maybe it's from a job, but maybe you don't like this job, even though the money's good. Or maybe you really like this new job that you have, but the money's not good. And maybe it's time to just change your relationship to money. So that's happening. Then we get to July. And July, we have a few, just really 2 big things specifically for the Cancer risings. Mars enters Virgo on July 10th. It's going to be entering your 3rd house of communication, tech, short distance travel. Also rules things like siblings and neighbors and people around you. This isn't the most important thing for you guys, but what's actually interesting is Mars is going to ingress into Virgo, and that's really going to kind of kick off all of this 3rd house stuff that we've got going on. There's going to eventually be a Mercury retrograde here, and I think Mars, which causes problems and fights, is going to activate it. Mars in Virgo in the 3rd, at this point, you're going to be probably more anal, more like, I need to do this in this specific time frame and in this specific way, and you're going to be really kind of like pinpoint pinpoint, what's the word I'm looking for? Like just being exact with where you place your energy. And that might cause some anxiety, but you're probably just going to be more focused on like getting the things done in specific orders that you need to get it done in. But then after that, when we get to about the 18th here, this is when the North Node and the South Node enter Aries and Libra. This is really big specifically for you guys because, again, we already had one eclipse in Aries, but now we're actually having the nodes shift over. The North Node is going into your 10th house, career, legacy, reputation. There's this urge, there's this pull, there's this hunger, there's this drive to do more things in your work and your career. This coincides when Mars enters Virgo too. But the South Node, which represents this drain, what's exhausting, what you have to purge, what you have to get rid of in order to balance out this energy, is going into your 4th house, which is about your home, family, and living situation, and also your parents. So there's something starting on July 18th that it's, something really shifts when it comes to like your living situation and your career. There's going to be all of this drive for this next year and a half to do all these ambitious things with your work. And again, this is really important for like 2025 and 2026. But as the South Node goes to the 4th house, there's going to be this like upending of a balance in your living situation or with your parents. So this might have to deal with moving. This might have to deal with just kind of like, letting go of, past, bullshit with your parents or something like that. Because the South Node is really draining and exhausting, and it's in Libra of like harmony and relationships and balance. And the South Node in Libra is kind of like, I would like the South Node in Libra is like peace was never an option. I have to do this. And so there's going to be a lot of this going away from, living situation stuff, family stuff, and more of this direction towards career things. Then that brings us to July 22nd when Venus stations retrograde in Leo. Again, 2nd house, money, finances, food. And what's important about this is where Venus is going to be for the next little while. She's been there all of June, the most of July. She'll be there from August, September, and October. But this is where that change really begins. Venus rules your 11th house of friends and community. And Jupiter is here. So there's a lot of friends and community stuff that's been on your mind. Venus also rules your 4th house of your home and your living situation. And it's going retrograde in the 2nd house. So there's something coming up between friends and living situation regarding money. And as Venus starts to retrograde, this is where you undergo a transition phase of really changing your relationship to money, changing your relationship to finances. What's important about this too is Venus goes retrograde in the same sign every 8 years. So I want you to think about summer of 2015 and what was going on for you, specifically around money and friends and living situation stuff. Because this is exactly where Venus was 8 years ago. The exact same dance. So keep in mind what happened then, and you might have a better idea of what the summer might have in store for you. But this is really where that value shift really takes place, and you start going, okay, I don't want this attention. I want to do something else with it. So we get to August, and then we get to the halfway point. This is, mind you, this is like 2 or 3 weeks after Venus stations. We get to the Venus Cazimi. This is on the 13th. And the Venus Cazimi, again, that's when a planet conjoins the sun. This is marking that halfway point of the retrograde cycle. This is really another rebirth or a change in the Venus stuff. And while you might undergo this change process on the 22nd, it's really around August 13th when you're really going to notice that change, right? That's the difference between like starting a new routine or starting, to work out, and there's that value shift, but then a few weeks into it, you start to, see some results. That's what this Venus retrograde is. And this is Venus conjoining the sun, which is your 2nd house ruler of money. So there's some type of like, again, this is maybe where you realize that change is taking place. This is where you see those results for the first time and you really start to say, okay, now I really am moving in this way. Now that I got a little bit of results to run with, now I'm going to go all the way. But again, this has to do with friendships too. Changing your friends maybe around money things. This is also changing your living situation based off money things. So then we get to August 24th, and that's when Mercury goes retrograde in Virgo. This is happening in your 3rd house of communication, technology, short distance travel, siblings, neighbors, people close to you. And so this is why I brought up Mars in Virgo, because Mars creates a bunch of problems and conflicts, right? And Mars will continue to go through Virgo, and then Mercury will be on it most of the time. And then once Mercury goes retrograde, there's going to be this moment of like, oh, this is what I miscommunicated. Oh, this is why my schedule is all over the place. And Mercury's going to go retrograde in Virgo. There's going to be this, reshifting around siblings, neighbors, communication, dated, not habits, but like your schedule. So like maybe this is trying to get a better schedule for the money that you're making at this point. But anyway, the Mercury retrogrades aren't that crazy this year. But this one it's in Virgo on top of Mars. It might have a little bit of problems. So then after that, we get to August 28th, about 4 days later. Actually, I could do that better. There we go. 4 days later is when we get Mars ingressing into Libra. This is really important because it's going into your fourth house of the home and family and living situation. And we just had the nodes shift into here. So this is kind of now starting all of the problems with the living situation stuff. So Mars goes into Libra. Mars rules fights and conflicts, right? And it's going into detriment. That means Mars likes to be in Aries where it's about fighting and conflict, but in Libra, it's about peace and balance, and Mars doesn't do that well there. But it's going into your fourth house of home and family, and so there's going to be like this passive feeling with your living situation, feeling like you have these issues, but you can't address them, and the situation's passive, and Mars in Libra also has to do with being indecisive with things, and so you're really going to see a lot of problems come up from the living situation at this point, and that's going to be building up for climatic events over these next few months, and we'll be going into it. That brings us to September, and this is when Venus stations direct in Leo. So again, this is where now that Venus is morning star and starting to move forward, this is like I'm making the money that I want. I have the friends that I want. I'm clear about what I want, and I'm going for it. Evening star Venus is very like things come to evening star Venus versus morning star Venus is very like I'm going to go for this because this is fun and this is what I want. And it's in Leo, second house, money, finances, resources. So there's some type of forward movement regarding also friends and living situation regarding your finances. That's really positive. But the twist on this, and this is what I find so fascinating about this Venus retrograde, is Jupiter stations retrograde on the same day. And and again, this is in your 11th house of friends and communities and networks. And so Jupiter's in the sign of Venus, right? And we will have Venus retrograde. And then literally on the same day here, watch. Venus is red, Jupiter's black. Venus is black, Jupiter's red. And so Jupiter going forward is like giving a bunch of opportunities, giving you a bunch of expansion with friends and networks and communities. And then when Jupiter goes retrograde, there's going to be this questioning that comes into play. Jupiter is all about faith and hope. And this is where the faith that was kind of given to you easily kind of goes away, and you have to muster up that faith and belief yourself. So this is going to be probably a shift in your friendships. I mean, Venus is also going to be squaring Mars, so this might be around money, and this might be around living situation stuff, but your ideas and your just blind faith towards friends is going to change at this point, and you might start reflecting a little bit deeper on what it means to be in a friendship, what it means to be with a group of people. It's also Jupiter in Taurus. Who do you value? This has a lot to do with value and time and what's worth your time, what's worth your energy, and things like that. And then about 2 weeks later, Mercury stations direct in Virgo. The communication clears up. Any plans that you have get resolved, and things finally start to move forward by the end of September. Then we get into October. October, a lot of things change for you guys. First off, Mars conjoins the South Node in Libra. It happens on the 4th. This is a really big deal because now that Mars is in Libra in your 4th and there's these fights and conflicts and this imbalance in your living situation, this is where you got to drain the swamp. I hate using that phrase, but it's so good sometimes. The thing is, the South Node is this purging, right? The South Node is this releasing and getting rid of stuff. And Mars rules your 5th house of kids, love, romance, sex, pleasure, 10th house of career. And so this is like when, ties have to be severed. This is like, I feel like a lot of Mars in Libra on the South Node too is like maybe having to surrender your will for the sake of other people. Like what I don't want you guys to do is have like the savior complex and sacrifice your own wants and needs for the sake of other people. I don't think that's healthy. But that's what this is going to feel like. It's going to be like either I have to sacrifice my wants and needs for the peace to happen, or I have to, open this shit straight up and cause problems. And so this is important because we're about to have an eclipse here. And this Mars South Node conjunction is going to be starting what happens during the eclipse. So pay attention to what happens on October 4th because it's going to be important as we go on through October. Right after that, though, Mars enters Scorpio a couple days later. This will be fun this is where it gets fun for you guys. It's going to be entering your 5th house of sex, passion, creativity, arts, children, recreation. Mars rules your 5th house, so you guys really like it intense. And as Mars goes into your 5th house, this is a bigger time to focus on, again, love, romance, sex, pleasure. It's Mars in Scorpio, so being really deep, being really exotic, being really, intense with your creativity and your pursuits. And this seems like maybe your creative outlets might be a really good outlet for your anger or your frustration or just your energy in general. If you've got like a lot of built up energy, put it in the creativity around this time. But then 2 days later, we have that solar eclipse in Libra. And that's an eclipse in your 4th house of home and family and living situation, right? And so, like I said before, Mars in Libra is going to come in, cause a bunch of chaos, and then we get this eclipse. And this looks like an ending. I don't know what that looks like. Maybe you're moving out of your parents' house. Maybe you're moving out of your living situation at the moment. Maybe something dramatic happens to one of your parents. Maybe there's this, you got to leave the house that you're in. I'm not sure what it's going to be. But there's something that is ending, and, in order to balance things, it's like you have to get rid of this, or, things are very unbalanced and you have to do something drastic to get it back in balance, especially related to the living situation. And what's important about this is now Venus is out of Leo. She's out of shadow. She now is in fall in Virgo and opposite Saturn. So the pressure is really on at this point. And I think maybe around this point you have some falling out with friends. If you live with roommates, maybe there's a bunch of drama that happens. And then this is kind of like the end of all of that drama over the summer. That brings us to November. And November is when Saturn stations direct. Again, it's in your 9th house of spirituality. And the biggest thing with this is that Saturn's been retrograde. You've been doing the hard work, being disciplined. It's felt limiting. It's felt, like you've been trapped. But when Saturn stations direct, it's like all of that hard work pays off. With Saturn being retrograde, it's like, how do I explain this? Again, Saturn moving forward is like giving you all this responsibility and authority. And then Saturn goes retrograde and you're like, man, shit, it's kind of hard. This is actually kind of hard. But then when it goes direct, you've gone through this maturing process. It's like, okay, you've overcome the obstacles. You've overcome the challenges. Now you know better. Now it's just time to apply that discipline. And so when Saturn stations direct, you get a lot more clear about, again, beliefs, spirituality, far distance travel. This has a lot to do with relationships. Saturn rules your 7th house of relationships. Has a lot to do with other people's money too, especially if you have student loans. Like 8th house ruler in the 9th has a lot to do with like taking money out for school. But this is where it's like you kind of toughen up and you get your shit together when it comes to this area, and things become a lot more clear and easier to handle. Then we get to the 17th, just like 2 weeks later, and this is when we have the Mars Cazimi in Scorpio. Again, this is the 5th house. This is all the fun stuff. And what's cool about this is you just had the South Node go through your 5th house. So you have completely purged this area recently, and this is going to be the time where you really rebuild it. Something I want to bring to your attention is before the Mars Cazimi, which is on the 17th, right now we're looking at the 4th here, Mars will go opposite Jupiter and it will go opposite Uranus. So there's going to be a lot of extreme random events that happen within friends, relationships, sex. Whoops, I want this. There we go. But then all of that gets reset here on the 16th. Oh, my bad, the 17th, really, actually. So this is also your 10th house ruler of career and reputation, and that's getting reset in this 5th house area of love, romance, sex, pleasure. And so this is really, it's trining Neptune, it's sextiling Pluto. This is really powerful stuff. And this is, when Mars conjoins the sun and goes Cazimi, this is what we'd call like the beginning of the hero's journey. But I'm kind of coining this as like your villain origin story in a sense. This is like, something bad has happened and now you're like, all right, fuck it. Now I'm more motivated to do this. So take that for what you will. I think it's actually really exciting, although it's Scorpio stuff. It's still a little intense and spooky at times. But then Mars will enter Sagittarius shortly after that, and most of your energy is going to be focused on work, labor, routines, health, habits. And I want to pull up the chart for that because there's something peculiar going on with it. And that is Mars will square Saturn. So there's something about your work, because Mars rules your 10th house and it's in the 6th, that's getting in the way of your relationships. Like Mars in Sagittarius is like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm just going to jump in and see what happens. And it's squaring Saturn and Pisces, where that might not jive with like your plans, and that might feel really chaotic. So there's going to be some stressful tension here. But that brings us to December, and we have another Mercury retrograde in Capricorn. Again, this is in your 7th house of relationships. And so it's like that Mars ingress happens. There's some stress with relationships, and then Mercury goes retrograde, where a lot of this relationship stuff changes anyway. This is on December 13th. Not a lot happens between November and December. But what's really interesting about this Mercury retrograde is this is exactly where Mercury stationed direct earlier in the year. So whatever happens between January and February of this year, you're going to come back to it by the end of the year. And so this has something to do with a delay or a miscommunication or a hidden enemy becoming an open enemy within relationships. So just keep on the lookout for that. And then by the time we get to almost New Year's Eve, we have Jupiter stationing direct. And so Jupiter being retrograde is really questioning your beliefs around your friends, your communities, those that you hang out with. But once Jupiter stations direct, there's the sense of like hope finally moving forward, being like, okay, now I know what I believe. Now I know what I'm grateful for. Now I know where I can express my gratitude. And that's going to be really good for, again, friendships, networks, communities. That hope begins to become, clear again. Maybe you go and party on New Year's Eve and you're like, maybe my friends are great. And that's what leads us into 2024. And it's weird saying the word 2024 in a serious way, but that's what I have for you guys this year. Let me know what you guys are looking forward to the most this year, what you're looking forward to the least. Make sure you like this video so you can come back to it throughout the year and let me know how things end up evolving for you. Also, consider becoming a patron over on my Patreon. I do monthly rising sign horoscopes, live overviews. I do Ask Me Anythings, private Discord, ad-free, early release content, a whole bunch of other stuff too. Also, if you want to know exactly what is going to be going on specifically for you with your chart, feel free to book a consultation with me over my website, camwhiteastro.com. And yeah, thank you guys so much again for being here, taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate you guys, and I'll be seeing you guys next time.